It's time to get nerdy, y'all.
A little bit of gaming history for you.
Something relevant in gaming and discuss our opinions on it.
Should we kick it out of here, or should we kick-start it?
This is the part where you, the listeners, try to stump the hosts.
I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on a podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, lads and lasses of all ages, welcome to the show. It is Tuesday, August 20th, 2024, and it's time to get nerdy. Welcome to episode 315 of Two Nerds in a Pod, the nerdiest gaming podcast in the multiverse. I am Mac, one of your two co-hosts, and I am joined by my fellow nerd and connoisseur of comedy, Mr. Lam Galuka, also known as Mr. Nice Guy 425. And for the next hour of this podcast, we are going to talk about topics as they relate to video game. News, history, trivia, lawsuits, and everything in between as they relate to our favorite pastime. But first, Mr. Nice Guy, it's been a week. Anything exciting happen in your life lately?
Nothing exciting. My wife went on a girls' trip last weekend, so that's exciting for her, which meant that I had the kids, and so we really had a dad weekend. And I would say one of the most exciting things, because I was home for the majority of the weekend, is my oldest son is now getting into Marvel.
Ooh.
And I'm trying to be excited, but also not make him not want to get into Marvel. Because, I always joke about how someone getting into Marvel today has over a decade of movies to watch, right? With various timelines, MCU, non-MCU, there's so much stuff. So I'm expressing my excitement, but not wanting to overload him with information. So bottom line, we watched The Avengers. And that's not the traditional starting point, but it kind of brings all the heroes together. It's names that he's familiar with, and it was a good time. So that was one of the highlights of the stay-at-home weekend, Matt.
Oh.
How about you? What's new?
Not too frightfully much. I may have mentioned several weeks back that I had a massage and that my car died as well.
Those things go hand in hand, right?
Always. But I'm finally to the conclusion of that, as it took many weeks because we had people over, and that kept me from really getting at the problem because, entertaining, and then a visit to family, and that kept me from getting to it. But I finally nailed it down, and it was just a stupid relay, a fuel pump relay, which, for those of you who don't do that much car stuff, the short version is there's the part itself, right? And then, at least in somewhat older cars, there's a relay, and then there's a fuse. And so anything on an electrical thing could be sort of in that line, right? And so, I had the presence of mind to check the fuse first, and the fuse was fine, and I didn't bother checking the relay, so I went through all the trouble of cracking open the fuel tank, pulling out the old stuff, covering myself in gasoline.
Oh, wow.
And then replacing the fuel pump, because it's in there inside the gas tank, and then it didn't work, only just to realize it's just that little $10 relay that's only slightly more complicated than a fuse, and in the same general location. That was the culprit. And so, yeah, it's fine now, but that was probably my most interesting adventure over the weekend, aside from the things I've been watching and playing.
Nice. I got to tell you one more story.
Oh, please do.
Apparently, I'm getting old, and I'm not yet 40. I would consider myself to still be somewhat cool. I still listen to hip-hop. I still play video games. I still know about basketball and sports and the slang that the kids are using in the streets. But I was walking through the mall today, which is not a place that I often go, but I needed to go do some cell phone stuff. And there's this young man, and he has one of those booths set up in the mall, and he sees me walking by. He's like, "Hey, man, you want to come support this business? Come support this black-owned business. It's great." I was like, all right, well, let me check it out. I'm all about supporting all businesses. Black-owned businesses, I do have a soft spot for as a black man. So I go over, and he's like, "We do shoe shines. We touch up your sneakers and stuff with this special product." And just starts doing it on my shoe, right? Which is kind of like a squeegee in the street. I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
So he does one shoe, and I had my sunglasses on. And so he's like, "Does it look better?" So I took my sunglasses off. I was like, "Yeah, it looks better, man." And he's like, "Well, I'm not a hater, so I'm going to do the other one. We sell this for da-da-da-da-da amount of dollars. And by the way, you're a dad. You're working hard for your kids. You can use this on your kids' sneakers. You're a dad." And I was kind of like, how do you know I'm a dad, bro? Maybe I'm not a dad. Maybe I'm just not concerned about fitness. You can't make these types of assumptions. So, bottom line, Mac, he shined both my shoes up. These are sneakers, and I'm what the kids would call a sneakerhead. And he said, it cost this much money. I was like, how many have you sold today? He said 3. So I knew he wanted the sale. I said, if you knock $10 off the price, I will buy it from you. So he sold it to me, and he said, by the way, you can tip if you want to. So I gave him a tip. And he was like, see, Dad, you are a dad. I knew it. Da, 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 da. I'm like, dude, stop saying dad. Like, yes, I am a dad. You don't know that, though. Stop assuming. So, Mac, bottom line, I'm not as cool as I used to be. I look like a dad, which is okay.
Nice guy, what you have is you have the riz and the aura of a dad. And that is, no cap, man. No cap.
No cap. But now I'll tell you this, Mac.
Uh-huh.
My sneakers, they look I was going to misuse the word. I was going to say they look like fire just to try to be funny. But they look good. They look fantastic. And on that note, I say we do what we do best and we hop right up in that gaming news, man. What do you think about that?
Let's do it. Mr. Nice Guy, what is new in video gaming?
So much. And thank you everyone for tuning in to episode 315 of Two Nerds in a Pod, nerdiest video game podcast in the galaxy. Mac, first news story. Now, I'm a sucker for video game TV shows, adaptations, but also historical shows. And this comes from GameSpot.com by Eddie Macick. Amazon's secret-level video game TV series features, and it lists some games. Prime Video is expanding its video game-themed offerings as Deadpool 1 director Tim Miller will helm a new video game anthology series for the Fallout TV show streamer. The show, Secret Level, arrives on Prime Video on December 10th and will feature a number of major game franchises. And Emotional Miller appeared on stage at Gamescom opening night to promote the new show, word of which first circulated last week. Mac, here's some of the shows that are going to be part of the 15 episodes. Armored Core, Concord, Mega Man, Pac-Man, Sifu, Spelunky, The Outer Worlds, Unreal Tournament, Warhammer 40,000, and various PlayStation game studios. In addition to this new series, Prime Video is currently making a God of War show, Season 2 of Fallout, and a new Tomb Raider series and a game, among other video game projects. Mac, how do you feel about the non-adaptative video game shows? There was one on Netflix, I can't remember the name of it right now, but ones that give more of a historical look into video games rather than adapting a video game with actors and universe and cinema.
Well, I absolutely love them. And I think we need more of them because there's such a rich history. And not to take too much away from our good friend Stephen Kent, author of some of the most fantastic video game history books, but crack one of his books open sometime, and you can just read page after page after page of interesting stuff. Several episodes back, right, there was a thing that I went on for, the history about sort of like the great Tetris grift, right?
Sure.
Where like these people thought that they had the license to it, and these people thought they had the license to it, and everybody was sort of like, because people lied, cheated, stole a bunch of stuff, and it was all a huge mess. Things like that, way common in the Wild Westy days of video gaming. And there's a lot of fun, interesting, and sometimes shady stuff, even in the more recent past as well. They're probably going to focus, I imagine, on some of the history, and with a name like Secret Level, I assume it's going to be focusing on like the secrets in the video games. Is that what it's about?
My understand, and that's what it really doesn't go into, and I'm going to have to look more into it. I assume it's the history, and maybe rather than the secrets, maybe it's more other stuff. But dude, by the way, the version of the Netflix show was High Score. That's the show I was thinking of, that documentary.
That's the one.
And then additionally, when Max says Steve Kent being a friend, he is legitimately a friend of mine, for those listeners at home who may not know. One of the best video game journalists ever. Sometimes when we say my friend, we're being a little sarcastic. I actually do know him, and he's a phenomenal human being and a phenomenal writer. And would love to get him on the show at some point, actually, to chat video games. His book, The History of Video Games, one of the definitive books of that category, so you should check that out. Mac, I will say about this show, I'm excited, but I like that type of content more when it is on YouTube.
Interesting.
Well, yeah, for whatever reason, the video game historian great YouTuber whose content I truly, truly enjoy. He puts out a video like every few months, but they're always super high production quality, and he always goes deep into the archives and gets resource and cites sources, and it's very, very informative.
Yeah. No, agree. I can understand that. I can see how I feel like YouTube as a platform is a lot easier to get into, get out of. Pop in, pop out, watch a thing.
Yeah.
It just, that's a very good point. I hope that this is also available on YouTube then.
I hope so too. Well, let's move on to another news story. This is simply a feel-good story that got me excited. And Mac, I'm curious to hear your perspective after I read this blurb on how frequently you replay games. And I'm not talking about like your Mega Man 2s or your games that you can beat in a speed run, but games that take like 10, 15 hours plus. How frequently do you go in and replay them? So this is on Kotaku.com. Before I get that opinion from you, it's called "Get the Best Platformer of the 2010s on Sale Now." Climb the mountain, find yourself, and have a cathartic cry or two. This is by Moises Tavares. He writes, or they write. It is never a bad time to pick up Celeste. Widely heralded as one of the best platformers ever and one of the best video games of the 2010s, this title of the gaming world, set the gaming world on fire when it was released in 2018. Celeste has always been a beloved game, whether that's for its tough but fair difficulty, its trans protagonist, which, side note, editor's note, we did not know that the protagonist was trans until years after, when the creator, Matty Thorson, stated that. And it became very clear from evidence within the game. I just want to put that out there. Not that it matters, but just for reference. He goes on to say, or its approach to subject matter such as mental illness, but regardless of exactly what pulls you in, it's difficult to deny Celeste magnetism. I can't read today. I suggest you let it pull you in too. Currently, it's on sale for $5. He goes on to talk about it more and more. Mac, I think Celeste is a phenomenal game. I may double dip. I own it on Switch, but I could use a copy for my Steam Deck. What are your thoughts on Celeste, and what game would you replay if you ever did that?
I love Celeste. It's fantastic. Definitely one of the great games that I've played, definitely within the last decade. So excited that people, not just you and me, are still talking about it. But man, as for games that I would love to see that kind of treatment, I mean, I would love to see a resurgence of interest in the classic Mega Man games. And who knows, maybe since Secret Level is going to be featuring at least some Mega Man game or games as, in some episode, maybe there'll be a little bit more interest.
So to be clear, to clarify a little bit, I'm talking more about games that take a little bit longer. I think Celeste is probably 10 to 15 hours. And so it's not a game that you can really just sit down and play in an afternoon. I'm curious if there's any games that are a little bit deeper that you dive into or want to dive into. And while you're thinking, what has stopped me from doing this is simply the fact that time is finite. And so I want my gaming time to go towards new experiences. This article is making me want to go play this again, as well as Hollow Knight. So what games like that would you want to get back into?
I would love to go back and play Morrowind again.
Okay.
I'd love, because that's a lot of time. Now, granted, if you know exactly what you're doing, you can blow through Morrowind pretty quickly. But the discovery, the everything, and in a way, I'm probably going to get my wish because there's the Morrowind. I think the Skywind is what they're doing. The porting forward of Morrowind into the Skyrim engine and updating the graphics and such, which is definitely a fan thing, a modder passion project, but is something that's going on now and something that could give me that. But I am definitely sympathetic to what you're saying, Mr. Nice Guy. It is hard sometimes to carve out the large amounts of time that it feels like we never had that time in the first place because it just blew by so fast, but yet somehow we managed to play these games of such huge lengths. And it seems like we could never possibly get that amount of time again.
Yeah, and I already alluded to it, but for me, the game is Hollow Knight. Now, granted, I'll never fully, and it's been years since I've played it, you'll never fully be able to appreciate or get the plot twists or the Easter eggs as much as you could on a first playthrough. But it's a game that I've always wanted to go back to. And at $7.50 on a regular basis, I feel like I'm going to have to do it. The time commitment is more the concern than the replay. And once again, that's a game I played on Switch. Now I want to play it on Steam. Pick up Celeste if you have not already. Yes, it was on sale for $2 during the summer sale, but now it is only $5, and that is a great price.
For the record, Celeste would be a bargain at $10. Okay?
It really would. It really would.
So a bargain at twice the price, quite literally.
And I never finished the B-sides or the C-sides. So, I mean, there's so much to do. Let's talk about some of the announcements from Gamescom as Gamescom is going on right now, and then we will move on from news. This is by Darren Brothis on GameSpot.com. Mac, I'm curious if any of these catch your eye or excite you, namely a little shooter that I'm going to mention in just a moment. So here's some of the stuff that was announced. Inzoi, which it says it's been a hot minute since Inzoi. Krafton's take on The Sims has been in the spotlight, but Gamescom had a fresh trailer for the upcoming life simulation game. Sniper Elite Resistance. This one got me excited. This next one, Borderlands 4, was announced today.
Oh.
And it basically just says we got our first look. There was not any gameplay, but this game is set to come out in 2025. Call of Duty Black Ops 6 got me super excited. Goat Simulator Remastered, Persona 3 Reload, Episode Aegis, Dragon Ball Sparkling Zero, Dying Light the Beast. I had a blast playing through Dying Light 2 with some buddies over the internet last year, 2 years ago, whenever it came out. And then there's a bunch of other stuff. Path of Exile 2, King of Meat. I don't know what that's about. And a few other games. Mac, anything of these names excite you? Namely Borderlands 4. You hyped for that or not really?
I would enjoy Borderlands 4, I think. I enjoyed Borderlands 1, and the amount of Borderlands 2 that I played before my computer's graphics card just couldn't seem to handle it and crashed on me and never recovered. That I enjoyed what I played of that as well. So, haven't played Borderlands 3 at all. Haven't seen the movie either, which I actually want to, but that's completely separate thing. But yeah, no, I think Borderlands 4 would be pretty good. I've enjoyed what games in the Borderlands series I've played.
What I will say about Borderlands, and I would say I wouldn't call myself a Borderlands super fan. Like, if you were to, I see Borderlands the same way I see Star Wars. I enjoy it, but if you start asking me about plot lines and characters, I can't really get that deep into it. I just like shooting stuff, and I like co-op with my friends. Grab a bag of chips, grab a soda, play over the internet with some buddies, and have a good time. And always having infinite guns is super fun. Finding those overpowered builds and trying different characters. I'm not a min-maxer, but I do enjoy the Borderlands games. The thing I really like about Gearbox and what they've done with that franchise is they have the core series, Borderlands 1 through 4, but they've also done Tiny Tina's. They did Borderlands, the pre-sequel. They've tried some things that did not quite work, but they never abandoned the core. And I think that that's key to video games, is giving your fan base what they want, but also not being afraid to take risks. And also being self-aware enough to not take too big of risks within your core, but to do it elsewhere and to see what works. And so I'm excited for the return, after Tiny Tina's did not grab my attention, to see what they do with 4 in 2025. And I think it will be in the running for my game of the year. Mac, that has been our news for the week.
Well, now that we've looked at what's going on right now, let's take a little look into the past. We call this video game history. And this week, in years before, we saw the release of a bunch of very cool things. I'm going to focus just on 3 that I think are particularly noteworthy, and one of which is a bit of a callback to, last episode, I think. So, you may have heard about a little game called Sonic Mania. It was released in 2017 for, most all the modern consoles. But Sonic Mania, and this is why it's a callback, is one of those games where it was the efforts of a modder in order to make a reproduction of a classic Sonic game that caught the attention of Sega and the seal of approval, getting Sonic Mania an official release and putting it onto our consoles. The love of a super fan. Of a Sonic head, is that what we're calling them?
I like that.
But the love of one of the diehard fans and the time and attention put all into it that brought us a new installment in the franchise. Let's hop a little bit farther back in time, though, to a little thing that was uneventful in 1989, and that's the launch of the Sega Genesis. Now, Mr. Nice Guy, I believe you were a Super Nintendo household, right?
As opposed to Sega Genesis?
Uh-huh.
Yes, we were a Super Nintendo household, absolutely.
Well, I'll give this to you that this week in 1991 was also the release of the Super Nintendo. So I'm going to ask you about your favorite SNES memories. But for my part, as I was a Sega Genesis household, a little bit of an asterisk there. We'll come back to that. But at launch, of course, the pack-in title for the Sega Genesis was Altered Beast. We wouldn't get Sonic the Hedgehog until, a couple years later. Also, interesting side note, the game Herzog 2, which is recognized as being basically the proto-MOBA game, predates Sonic the Hedgehog by like a full year. Which is kind of wild to think about, these different, these different trains. But anyway, not exactly the strongest launch titles, or at least not something we would think of. But the big strength of the Sega Genesis at its launch was it was up against systems like the Nintendo Entertainment System. And that jump from one to the other, huge deal. Their sort of emphasis on having an arcade feel in your home was particularly effective in the early days of the Sega Genesis, and even fairly effective in the early days of the Super Nintendo launch as well. Perhaps more on that some other time. However, my favorite memory regarding the Sega Genesis comes many years later, as I got my hands on Sega Genesis during summer one year. I believe some child must have really done something naughty, because all of their entire library, and it was for so few dollars at this yard sale. Whatever he did, he really must have done something bad, because just the whole box.
What year was this, approximately? Was this like, or my kid went to college, I'm giving stuff away, or was it like my son's in trouble?
This was in the early 90s, so like the Sega Genesis was still pretty, but it had all the things there. It had the 32X. The only thing it didn't have was the Sega CD, but like I had a Tower of Power for that thing.
Wow.
And it was very cheap. I think I walked away with it all for like $30 or whatever, which was a lot of my spending cash, but still nothing compared to what I got.
That's a great deal.
A fantastic deal, and that's my Sega Genesis memory. Well, Mr. Nice Guy, the Super Nintendo in 91. Over to you, my good man.
Yeah, so I don't have any memories like that. I was fortunate enough to have a Super Nintendo, and that was like past the NES stage where my parents really weren't buying games, to the point where they were like, we'll buy you games occasionally. And also, I was old enough to make money that I could make money, and my brother and I could go buy our own games. So, a couple memories. Number one is getting the Super Nintendo for my birthday when I turned either 10 or 11, 5th grade. I remember this distinctly because one of the first games that I got was Donkey Kong Country 2, and that to this day remains one of my favorite platformers of all time. And this was around the time, if I remember correctly, when the internet was in its infancy. I never had Nintendo Power, but either we had just gotten the internet, I think we had, and enough people around me had the internet that we were able to look up different codes and different secrets related to the game, and that just made playing it so much more fun. Being able to say, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z, you can get Donkey Kong coins up the wazoo, and just different things like that. Another memory is me and my brother saving up our allowance and our lawn mowing money, etc., and buying Super Mario All-Stars, which is a super interesting purchase because we already had access to several of the Mario games on the NES, but the idea of being able to play them on the SNES, save your progress, and have updated graphics and have access to lost levels was just extremely exciting. So that was a great memory. And then a third one that I'll share super briefly is I remember summers in Seattle, and that was the console we were playing. Playing games like War of the Gems, Marvel, and going head-to-head on Looney Tunes B-Ball, also going head-to-head on Ken Griffey Jr.'s winning run, and just having a blast, getting angry, throwing the occasional controller. But those are some of my fondest summer memories, was the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, I mean, there are some titles for the Super Nintendo that I think really hold up. I mean, I didn't get my hands on a Super Nintendo until like 2017, 2018, maybe in there. But some of those titles still fantastic today. Anyway, those are just some of the things this last week. Kind of the beginning of the holiday season as we're getting prepped for people to buy games for their kids. Now now it's a little bit different, but back then you had to get it released now, so you had it on store shelves for people to buy for their kids for Christmas.
No digital purchases.
That is just some video game history for us.
Fantastic. Well, now it's time for our topic of the week, where we discuss something relevant in gaming and gives our opinions on it. Now, as a reminder, this is a rotating segment because a lot of times Mac and I are talking about Indie Game of the Week, where we give our opinion on new games that we're reviewing. Rest assured, we're still digging through a handful of those, but we've decided not to do that every week. We want to give games their due time. We want to let them marinate. We want to be able to truly give you our thoughts without rushing through, so we will not be doing that every week. Now, Mac, for this week's story on Kotaku.com, we've got something about a remaster mod that was shut down the day before release by Zach Zweisen. Here is what Zach writes. Activision has reportedly sent a cease and desist letter to the devs behind the H2M mod, the highly anticipated fan mod for Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare Remastered. Was focused on recreating the remastering the online multiplayer of Modern Warfare 2 for PC players. That's a sentence, Zach. That is a sentence. It goes on to say, COD 4 Modern Warfare Remastered launched in 2016 and included the original campaign as well as a remastered version of the game's beloved multiplayer mode. However, when Modern Warfare 2 Remastered in 2020 arrived, it only included the campaign and didn't feature any online multiplayer. For many players, this was extremely disappointing, as MW2's online multiplayer is considered by many COD fans to be the best in franchise history. So some fan modders decided to recreate this online action and maps using MW2 Remastered. And this mod, H2M, was set to be active very soon, but then Activision stepped in and shut it down. And here's the part that's really interesting, Mac, and I want to get your perspective, not on the shutting down of a mod, because we see this every day, but on the fact that they actually provided a rationale as to why they were doing it. Necessary or faux pas? So here's what it says. It says, on August 15th, the developers behind the mod announced they had received a cease and desist and that they were shutting it down immediately. This is a day before launch. It goes on to say, we are complying with this order and shutting down all operations immediately and permanently. And Mac, the reason that Activision gave, is that they believe it will hurt the sales of other Call of Duty games, specifically Black Ops 6, which is set to launch shortly. What do you think about Activision actually providing a reason? Classy or ulterior motive?
One way to read that is that Black Ops 6 is intended to incorporate a remaster of Modern Warfare 2's multiplayer. I don't know how different Black Ops 6 is from Modern Warfare because I haven't played any of the Call of Duty games, but Llama, as somebody more versed in that, does that sound crazy on its face?
It doesn't sound crazy, but I don't think that's why, and the reason why is because Black Ops is Treyarch. Modern Warfare is Infinity Ward.
I see.
So as you know, there's like a 3-year rotation for Call of Duty, and so that's the reason I don't think that's...
Gotcha, okay. In spite of how very wrong I am, we're absolutely keeping that in the show. But, but what I will say is that when it comes down to it, I mean, classy, not classy, I think it's probably the truth. I mean, on the one hand, you have Nintendo who lies through their teeth about why they're doing things and how they're doing things. And then you've got Activision who tells you the truth. I think the end result is the same. I think I actually respect Activision being honest and saying, yeah, we're shutting this down because we think it'll hurt our future sales. I think at the very least, trying to be honest and not pretending like it's something different, I kind of respect it more.
Yeah, so I actually don't. And the reason why is because I don't think that it is the truth.
Oh, okay.
I don't think that anyone who's excited for Black Ops 6 in 2024
is going to delay their purchase because they have this modern...
Right, because there's a mod for a 2020 remaster that's now coming out. And I just was skimming this article, and I want to add one more piece of context. I should have said this before I asked you the question. It says players weren't happy about the news, especially because for the last week or so, Modern Warfare Remastered was on sale on Steam, letting tons of players buy the game at a discount as they waited for the mod to launch.
Oh. So the ulterior motive is maybe we let everybody think this is happening, this mod is going, get a lot of people to buy this game, we even put it on sale, make it look like this is going to happen, and then the day before we shut it down. Oh, ooh, okay. Yeah, that certainly couches this in a much different...
It does, and I don't know if that was their intent, but I can't believe that they... Because this is
they
Activision.
Certainly didn't become aware of it the day that they sent the cease and desist, the day that they said shut it down.
Right.
That was not when they became aware of it.
100%. And it's not Treyarch that's saying this.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, we want our game to do as well as Infinity Ward's. It's not Infinity Ward saying this. It's Activision. It's the mothership saying, hey, this cannot happen. So for that reason, typically when people shut down a mod, it's simply, hey, cease and desist. You're stealing assets. You're doing something that you're not allowed to do with no explanation, right? When Nintendo shut down that Mario 64 mod a few years ago, they shortly after released a Mario 3D All-Stars that contained Mario 64, but they didn't say, hey, we're going to put Mario 64 out again. They just said, hey, this is a violation of copyright. And I almost respect that more than giving a reason. I think that giving a reason is likely not the true one in this instance.
Yeah, no, I'm not a fan of the lying. I mean, that additional context, it could still possibly be the truth. Galvatron, who's here with us, says that he thinks that a Modern Warfare 2 multiplayer remake would absolutely lessen engagement for Black Ops 6. I don't know, but I mean, I suppose it's always theoretically possible. Could it be the truth? Could it be some component of the truth? But this certainly seems to make it seem very suspect.
I almost hope that a lot of people refund the game on Steam, because what is the point of having the campaign if you were anticipating the multiplayer? You're not going to play the campaign over and over and over again, right? So I hope that they get their money back. That has been our topic of the week.
Now it's time for us to turn to a little crowdfunding project that's trying to get off of the ground. We've talked about the big guys. Now it's time to talk about the little guys. Or maybe not so little? Well, we'll talk about it. In Kick or Kickstart today, we're going to talk about a game called Industrial Annihilation that is trying to get off of the ground. So, Industrial Annihilation. This is a spiritual successor, an actual successor, because back in 97, we had a game called Total Annihilation. And then we got Planetary Annihilation in 2014. Both very well-received games, by the way. And Planetary Annihilation was funded via Kickstarter back in the early 2010s. Now, at least some of the same crew is back to make this game Industrial Annihilation, which is an RTS, real-time strategy game, with a focus on factory building. They're claiming to have a lot of the same people working on it, and so this seems like it is actually not just a spiritual successor, but actually another game in the line. So anyway, that's why I'm like, it's not entirely clear, but that seems to be the case. So back to it, right? A real-time strategy game, focus on factory building. They're looking for a $30 minimum buy-in for a copy of the game. And that, right out of the gate, is the bare minimum, but it does also entitle you to the early access release date, which isn't always typical, but sometimes is reasonable for these Kickstarters. And that early access release date will be December of this year. The date that I was seeing as I was reading through it was not 100% clear when they expect to have a full release date, but their roadmap seems to be about another 8 months or so after the early access. So those of you who don't buy in now, who knows if you'll be able to get early access on Steam at, say, $35 or maybe $40, and then maybe full release at $50. These are details that would be nice to know, but often are not included in a Kickstarter for various reasons. Now, at this moment, they are 59% of the way to their $200,000 goal, with 15 days left to go on Kickstarter. So, Mr. Nice Guy, now that you've had a chance to take a look, anything jump out at you?
Honestly, Mac, I feel like over the past few weeks, and I could be misremembering, but I feel like there's been a lot of bad Kickstarters on the show. If I'm just thinking back, and this one to me is a breath of fresh air. It's very, very well put together. I don't know that every Kickstarter we review is an embedded YouTube video, but this one is, which I think is a fantastic marketing idea for visibility. Speaking of which, we don't really primarily focus on our YouTube, but go subscribe to youtube.com/2wordsinapod. We do post videos there. Mac, this looks awesome. And it's not the type of game that I typically play. I typically don't play RTSs, but I do have a really soft spot for Warcraft 3 and Age of Empires 2. And this to me looks like a modern version of those types of games. Am I correct in assuming that it's that type?
Yeah, it definitely has a lot of things in similar with those types of workflows, design flows, resource flows.
The graphics look phenomenal. The price point of $30, I'm okay with, and I'll tell you why. Because with this type of game, they typically come with a campaign, but they also typically come with the ability to play against people online or to play with your friends. And a good friend of mine have played a little bit of these types of games, and we always have a good time. And it's not a frequent thing, but I'd love to play a more modern version where it's not medieval, where it's not like that old Star Wars RTS, but it's something like this that's more StarCraft-like. I like everything about this, and I love that December 2024 is the estimated delivery. That is extremely reasonable.
Mm-hmm. At least for the early access delivery.
Correct. That's fair.
How does it strike you that this is coming out of your hometown Seattle?
You know what? I did notice that, and honestly, like, I can't say that it doesn't make me a little bit more endeared to their project. And a lot of good stuff has come out of Seattle in terms of game development. Bungie is based in Seattle. There's a lot of that old game, Blacklight Retribution, was from a studio based in Seattle. We need a RTS out of Seattle, and I'm excited and hope that these guys do it.
Well, I'm glad you feel so positively toward about it. I have similar, generally positive vibes. However, for basically a studio that is basically a new studio, right? While they do have whatever access to past IP, while they do have some pull with previous people, again, a whole third of their studio is contracted under Take-Two, so we know that they're missing at least a third. And they do put a bunch of names in here and talk about, they've got years and years in the industry. That's good. I feel like that's a good stepping point, but in general, you're kind of a new studio. And I like that you're making a reasonable, hey, it's going to take us $200,000, and that's where you've set your stuff. But for something that should be ready for early access in, 3 months, there is no playable demo. There's no slice. There's just the renders that we see in the vidya. And I just feel like, hey guys, come on. You need to bring, especially for something like this, when you are basically a new studio, you definitely need to bring a playable demo. And I would be cool if it was just one level for me to try out, the basic level, but to get an idea. I'm going to have to say Kick just because I think it's too big of a risk for me. But I'm glad that you like it, and I'm glad you're going to disagree with me because I think it's a close call.
I like it, and I'll tell you one other reason that I like it. First of all, I agree with you. There should be a demo. And second of all, I'm curious if those images in the video are actually of gameplay or if they are just renders. Like you said, we've been misled like that before by big studios. I like the idea of a game that is going to force me to sit in front of my computer and play it. because this is clearly a mouse and keyboard endeavor.
Oh,
this
for
is
sure.
This is not a Steam Deck thing, right? And so much of my PC gaming is now done on Steam Deck. I'm excited for something like this. So I say Kickstart. I disagree with you.
Excellent. And I'm so glad that you do. And those of you who are here with us live, or even those of you who are listening after the fact, just yell out. We are tabulating the results from here. We wish everybody the best of luck, but not all of them get kickstarted on Kick or Kickstart.
That is correct. But you know what, Mac? We got something else to talk about. It's time for Nerd Flex. Woo-hoo. A segment where you, the viewers, try to stump the host. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. We have a test bank of questions in front of us with video game trivia from years past, present, and future. Just kidding, not future. But Mac and I use nothing but our noggins to try and answer these questions. If you're here live and you have a question you want to put in the chat, feel free. But in the meantime, Mac.
Yes. Not only do we take your questions and have our test bank, we also, every so often, return the favor by challenging you with a little mystery sound. We call this a sound test in the old style. So, put on your thinking caps, open your ears, listen up, and if you're the first one to correctly identify this sound, let us know via the social medias, email, send a pigeon. Either way, if you're the first one, we will give you a prize handcrafted by me, sent to your door. Enough of that. Listen up. All right. Now on with trivia, Mr. Nice Guy.
All right, here is the first question. Link's Awakening is inspired by and uses assets from which Japan-only game?
Ooh.
It's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, if it uses assets from, I guess that means it's a Japan-only Game Boy release, right?
I would assume so. I'm trying to think. So there's some Game Boy games, and I love the Game Boy. I have the Analog Pocket, one of my favorite consoles. There's some old Final Fantasy games. They're not Japan-only, though. There's like Final Fantasy Adventure, Final Fantasy Legend, and they look similar to Link's Awakening. Top-down, side-scrolling, RPG-ish game. So I'm wondering if there's some Japan-only Final Fantasy game that we are just not aware of.
You could fill volumes with what we're not aware of. Mr. Nice Guy, I'm completely coming up blank. I've got no ideas.
That's okay. I'm going to go, I don't want to just, throw a name out there, but I feel like it's a Final Fantasy game. I'm going to go with something in that series. Okay, here's the name of the game. I've never heard of it. For the Frog, the Bell Tolls.
Huh.
I'm going to have to Google that later, but apparently that's a Japanese game that Link's Awakening takes assets from. Super interesting. Mac, on to our next question. Okay, I once again, we're not going to cherry pick. Another one that's very interesting. It's a fighting game question. What is unique about the fighters in Bloody Roar? What is unique about the fighters in Bloody Roar? Now, for context, Bloody, the B in Buddy and Bloody, and the R in Roar are both capitalized. So I assume that is the name of the game. What is unique about the fighters in that game?
Right. So I want to say that in Bloody Roar, all of the fighters are like animals.
Oh, so you know this game.
I mean, I have this vague recollection. You know, it's just like, it's the late 90s, Bloody Roar. Yeah, I feel like, or maybe am I thinking about Killer Instinct?
No, the animals, the fighters were not all animals in Killer Instinct.
Okay. Well,
Or
I will stick with I'm questioning everything. I'm going to stick with that as my answer, but as you know, it's not multiple choice, so we don't have to both commit.
Yeah, it's true. I'm going to go with they all have the ability to transform into something else. Like they all have transformative powers of some type.
I like it.
Whether that's animal or something else. All right, let's see what it says. Oh my gosh, dude. It's literally a combination of our two answers. It's that they can turn into animals.
Lom, that is how you do Nerd Flex.
That's how you do Nerd Flex. You put your heads together, you put your noggins together, and you answer the questions. Third question. Oh, wow. I think I know the answer to this, actually. These are great questions today. Sonic question. How many Sonic Advance games were released on the Game Boy Advance? How many Sonic Advance games were released on the Game Boy Advance? Almost seems too easy.
Oh, yeah. Definitely seems too easy, he said. 3, 4? I don't know. Just a guess.
I know of 3, but I mean, that seems way too easy. I mean, once again, we don't have to go together on this because it's not multiple choice. I'm going to go with 3.
I'll go with 4. Cover our bases.
Okay, final answer. It is 3 games indeed, Max. Sonic Advance 1, 2, and 3. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you do Nerdflix.
All right. Well, now we turn to a little bit of legalese.
Legalese.
I am not a lawyer. However, increasingly, the way that we experience video games is dictated by laws and shaped by intellectual property and all that sort of nonsense. So it's important for us to take some time and focus on it. Now, Lom, after 315 episodes of this show, there are some themes, one might say, that come up. For legalese, you might see themes like, you've heard people say this, but it's actually not bad because if you actually read the lawsuit. Or themes like, this is clear misconduct. Like, maybe, sure, somebody absolutely stole, and we have internal emails instructing them to threaten customers who complain with permabans, but it will never go to court because there will never be any long-term changes because this is going to be settled in forced arbitration. And today, we've kind of got a legalese that's combines 2 very familiar themes here. And today's segment is on the Disney case, which you've probably heard a little bit about. Mr. Nice Guy, have you?
I have not, actually. Tell me more.
So I just want to set this up that we are going to talk about Disney here. However, not only does Disney have video games that they produce and market, but also the types of things that we're going to talk about are typical in video games. But okay, on to Disney. You've probably heard about it. It's worse than it is. And this should be the case study in why forced arbitrations are bad. And I think we should be pointing to this as end of discussion about why forced arbitration clauses should never be implemented. So let's talk about the facts of the case. Fact number 1, Mr. Nice Guy. Disney owns a lot of stuff.
They sure do.
They own Disney Plus, Star Wars, ESPN, Marvel, Fox News, amusement parks. They own at least 26 different real estate companies and at least 1 outdoor mall with restaurants in a place called Disney Springs, just a few miles down the road from Disney World. So, back in October, a 42-year-old doctor named Dr. Tang Suan, and I hope I pronounced her name correctly, and her husband, Jeff, planned a Disney vacation for themselves, the 2 of them, and for Jeff's mother, so her mother-in-law. They bought their tickets online. They made it to their hotel a few days before, and they went to the Wrangling Road restaurant. And this is a question. Owned by Disney? Maybe? We'll come back to that.
Okay.
It was certainly within Disney's property. Now, they made the restaurant aware of their needs, as she had a deathly allergy to both nuts and dairy. They were assured by waitstaff and the cooking staff that they would be served food without this ingredients. When the food arrived, they checked again to make positive that this was allergen-free and were again assured that it was. Now, she was given food with those ingredients. After dinner, everybody kind of goes their separate ways. She goes shopping, he goes back to the hotel, and about 45 minutes after leaving the restaurant, she collapses, gives herself an EpiPen because she's got one on hand, because she does that sort of thing, but she still dies, I believe, in transit to the hospital. Coroner lists the cause of death as anaphylactic shock from nuts and dairy. That's in October of last year. In February, the husband files the lawsuit, wrongful death. Disney may or may not have participated, legal term, in the lawsuit by participating in discovery. That's a little side thing, but at this point, and this is why it's become news lately, because for those of you keeping an eye on the timeline, it is August, and Disney has thrown out this notion that they are going to compel arbitration, that there does not get to be a wrongful death lawsuit because, and I kid you not, the husband has potentially engaged in 3 different terms of service agreements with Disney. One, with using the Disney website. One for actually buying tickets to go to Disney World for him, his now deceased wife, of course, and his mother. And, of course, the humdinger, the third from his 1-month free trial of Disney Plus that he signed up for back in 2019. Now, of those 3 terms of services, the Disney Plus is the only one that has a forced arbitration agreement. Now, an astute observer like you, Lom, will notice that Disney Plus and a restaurant owned by Disney might not exactly have overlap.
Right.
As alleged in the initial complaint, Disney does not necessarily dispute. Very unclear, because Disney refers to all of their employees as like cast members. You know, when they're talking about the person who's got the suit on, the goofy suit, and things like that. They also refer to the employees of the business as being cast members. Disney represented on their website, it's different now, but back in October, it was the same that their cast members at the Wrangling Road restaurant could serve stuff without allergens and so on. But it seems a little bit contrary to reasonability sure, our cast members might have killed your wife, but you watched The Mandalorian, so no wrongful death lawsuit for you. Forced arbitration.
Bro, that's a good bit. Like, I don't want to make light of people's death at all, but that's a phenomenal, like, prove a point joke premise.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, 100%. And here's the real sad part, Mr. Nice Guy, because the question is, would this even work? Is it outside of reasonable bounds? And in a sane world, you might think but that it wouldn't, but like, you know, we are in the darkest timeline, and also, this is Florida we're talking about. No rules in Florida. The strange thing is that arbitration clauses often involve 2 things. Number one, they often involve a clause to the effect that this arbitration requirement survives even if you stop using the service, such as the Disney Plus agreement. So Disney's certainly arguing, hey, yeah, your 1-month free trial of Disney Plus binds you into arbitration for time and all eternity. Any dispute you have with Disney, the parent company, or any of its affiliates and subsidiaries. And 2, arbitration clauses usually include a, hey, if you don't agree with what's covered under the arbitration clause, guess who gets to decide that? The arbiter in arbitration! Yay! And those are, sadly, very legal and enforceable in the US. Now, this, of course, again, I promise I'm going to bring it back to video games, Mr. Nice Guy.
No problem. I want to hear the rest.
But in the question of, is the estate of a deceased person bound by the terms of a 2019 arbitration agreement that the estate never signed because the estate never existed at the time, and is the Disney Plus arbitration clause sufficient in scope to encompass this, these things determined by the auditor, or the arbiter, we don't know about. This is a question that you might think is silly, but is something that needs to be determined. But I will give this little, even as if that wasn't bad enough, Mr. Nice Guy, there's this gem offered as proof that Disney has gone above and beyond to make all of this right. Referring to the 3 tickets that Jeff bought for his now deceased wife and his mother on their visit to Disney World, WPDR, and I'm quoting, was kind enough to refund the cost of these non-refundable tickets, but explained to Mr. Piccolo, he has a different last name, she didn't take his last name, that it was not guaranteed that he would receive this type of exception in the future.
Wow.
Sorry we killed your wife, here, we'll refund your tickets, but don't expect us to do this again. So, this is how the case was when I wrote it. Now, this morning, the news broke that Disney had so much bad PR over the weekend, that they have magnanimously offered to voluntarily relinquish their claim to the arbitration agreement in this case. Now, they're absolutely going to 5 ways from Sunday claim that they have no other obligation, but their first or second inclination was to be like, hey, you gotta arbitrate any claims with us. I could say so much more about arbitration and how, in theory, it's a good idea, but in practice, the way that we've sort of Frankensteined monsters together, arbitration tends to be problematic. But companies love it because it keeps things out of the limelight, or at least that was the hope before they shot themselves in the foot by making this a public spectacle. But what's important in here, and I want everybody listening to know that we, you, me, all our listeners are probably bound by at least 10 different arbitration agreements just by hopping on the internet every day. Ever wondered why everybody wants you to sign up for their specific app? At the end of the day, the arbitration things, we need something to point to. We need a bit, Mr. Nice Guy, and it's sad that it comes at such high cost. But as I forget who the political scientist was who quoted that, nothing ever gets changed till little Susie's blood is in the streets. As morbid as it sounds. But I hope that this serves, at the very least, as a wake-up call to all of us that this isn't the first, the second, or the third time that Disney or any big company has engaged in very shady practices to try and keep things that are going on quiet, but this is one of the ways that it's commonly done. And this is one of the ways that we wind up hearing about a class action for data stolen or for any number of unjust, charging practices. But we never hear about it anymore because the forced arbitration makes it go away nice, quick, and quiet like. But this ensures that at the very least, this is in the forefront. And I hope that the next time you hear about somebody trying to pass legislation to curtail what arbitration can do, maybe throw your support on it. Let a senator or congressman know that it's something that you're interested in, because I feel like something's got to change. And just because they relinquished it, Disney, in this case, they are still retaining for themselves the ability to call this out anytime they want, hopefully in a slightly less public fashion, but no less scummy fashion.
It's interesting, man. We need a case that sets the precedent that it is unreasonable to expect people to read that much fine print before engaging in an activity that they are waiting to do. Now, I understand that is a very specific request, but at the same time, putting pages and pages of terms and service before being able to play a video game, watch a movie, go to an amusement park, it's just not realistic, and it's not right.
Yeah.
You have to protect yourself somehow, so I get it, but I just don't think it's right.
It feels like the balance has shifted way too far one direction.
Right. You could put 100 pages of stuff. I mean, you could literally put something in there that says you owe us $1,000 for every movie you watch, and 99.9% of people would not realize it until it got on the internet. The other thing, too, I'm super interested, and you can edit this out, about what it is like to have that type of peanut allergy and what other types of cases have set as a precedent for people who have died. Because the reality is, someone could say, if you have a peanut allergy that could result in you dying, just don't eat out. Because even if you don't have peanuts in your food, there may be peanut-adjacent products near where your food was prepared. And that can be an issue.
Yeah. In the interest of, being brief here, I skipped over a whole bunch, but she went out of her way. The website said that they could do this. They showed up. They were like, what can you tell me won't have nuts or dairy? They brought her specific menu items. Then when they brought the food to the table, some of them were flagged allergen free, but not all of them. So she stops and is just like, hey, not all of these are flagged as being allergen free. Are you sure? Are we sure? Just multiple steps in the chain where she exerted basically every effort aside from getting up and walking out to protect her own life in the situation. And, just everybody in the chain failed her. And it's really sad. But it is kind of the first time that what we've had is a company who's in charge of a restaurant also got you on an arbitration clause for an app 5 years ago. So it's because restaurants usually don't have apps or waivers that you sign when you head in. Not even those trendy things in San Francisco.
They do have apps, actually. I'm being silly. Sorry. Well, cool.
Yeah. So definitely different, definitely unique, and I hope it's a wake-up call.
Well, thanks for sharing, Mac. Watch those terms of service before you sign them. And now, before we go, we have one last segment called What We've Been Watching and What We've Been Playing, where we talk about the cool, nerdy stuff we've been into. You know the drill. If you're here live, let us know what you've been watching and playing, reading, whatever it is, as long as it's nerdy. Mac, what you been into the past couple of weeks?
So for the past couple of weeks, let's see, I've been watching Never Stop Blowing Up. I think I might have already told you last week, I watched an amazing movie from 1944 starring a young Angela Lansbury and an Ingrid Bergman called Gaslight that was great. As for playing, I may be one of the few people in the world to ever get all the way through a Curse of Strahd campaign in Dungeons & Dragons. Looking forward to that. Fingers crossed. But played a little bit of D&D, a little bit of GURPS, just kind of hanging out, doing the thing, and that's sort of me. How about you?
Nice. So as far as playing, I did mention last week that I picked up Kid Dracula. And I've been playing a good amount of that. The Japanese version, of course. Hashtag baller on a budget. Playing a lot of Balatro. Got a couple games of Fortnite in with my kids as the new season just started. And as far as watching, I mentioned we watched The Avengers, me and my son. And I've been watching this show called The Great Barbecue Showdown, or The American Barbecue Showdown, on Netflix. And I'm a huge fan of grilling and smoking meat. So it's been interesting to watch these other people, some amateurs and some pros, compete in this competition. And Mac, I have to say, smoked some ribs this past weekend.
Ooh.
Probably the best ribs I've ever smoked. Did one as a dry rub, one much more juicy and syrupy with my own little mix, and they both were out of this world. So thanks for tuning in, everybody, to episode 315. I am Lum, also known as Mr. Nice Guy, joined by my comrade Maction. Keep gaming, be kind to each other, and remember, video games are art. We'll see y'all next week, same bat place, same bat time, same bat rhymes. Keep it nerdy, y'all. Deuces.
See ya.